Okay, you know those movies where a character goes through a paradigm shift that completely reframes how they understand the world? Like Bruce Willis in The Sixth Sense?
They only see what they want to see. They don't know they're dead.
Or Jim Carrey in The Truman Show? For me, developing a better relationship with narrative momentum was a little like that, in that it entirely changed how I thought about what writing is and what a writer does. In an earlier video, I made the argument that a book or a screenplay is not itself a story, but rather that a book or a screenplay is the most compelling version of a story. This concept is absolutely critical because it shows how, despite what many of us think, a story exists independently of how a writer tells it. Like 1,000 different writers will tell the exact same story 1,000 different ways.
I know where she's headed.
Untie me, please.
I haven't got time. You'll be all right.
So writing isn't capturing a story so much as it is helping others to see a story that they might not otherwise be able to see. Why this matters is because, at least for me, it illuminates a deeply important attribute of stories. And that's whether a novel or a screenplay or a memoir, or in this case, a YouTube video, a story is not for the writer, it's for the reader. I'm not saying people don't or shouldn't write for themselves. I'm also not saying that writers do or should ignore their own creative instincts and try to guess what readers want. What I am suggesting is that writing, as much as it is about telling a story, it's even more about sculpting an experience. Think of it as the difference between building a jungle gym and designing an experience for children at play. For example, since my hope is that you'll watch this video all the way through, I've made an effort to assemble it not as a collection of facts and opinions, but as that which might facilitate a narrative experience. So I've done my best to make it interesting, to make it informative, and maybe most important of all, to make it directional. Because I want you to feel like this is going somewhere, like it's building towards something, like there's a payoff both around the next corner as well as at the end of the video. And that's the paradigm shift. It's in moving one's focus from the story you want to tell to the experience you want a reader to have. And my argument is that the way to do this, the way to shift from a story focus to an experience focus, is by learning to cultivate and maintain momentum. But how though, right? Before we get to that, here's a quick definition of momentum. Momentum is the quantity of motion of a moving body. The quantity of motion of a moving body. But in the story, what is the moving body? What is the thing that has or should have motion and momentum? You could make the argument that the moving body is the plot, right? Or like the general flow of a story.
Does this mean they're coming?
And sure, that's probably not incorrect. But for me, the better answer is that the moving body of a story is the reader's attention. I like to think of a riverbed as the story and the water flowing down it as the reader's attention. Or maybe it's one of those obstacle courses where the obstacle course is the story and the marble is the reader's attention. And where the hypnotic, riveting question is always, will the marble, that is, will the body in motion, make it to the end of the course? So the other part of the definition then, quantity of motion. And I love that phrase because applied to a story, it's a reminder of how dynamic and how alive a narrative experience can be. But again, how? Isn't that the question? On the one hand, the answer is with every paragraph, with every sentence, and with every word it uses. Plot, character, dialogue, tone, setting, etc. All the, quote, craft things we're told to focus on. But on the other hand, a story creates momentum by simply doing with reader attention what an obstacle course does with a marble and what a riverbed does with water. By establishing a starting point and an ending point, and by designing the most engaging route from one to the other. If we take this video, just because it is the one thing that I know for certain that you and I have in common, I chose the idea of a paradigm shift as a starting point.
They don't know they're dead.
I hoped that might catch your attention and might tip it into motion. And since this is a video about momentum, I chose an ending point that is very much about momentum. I then tried to design a narrative experience that, yes, draws on the importance of momentum, but more importantly, attempts to intensify your interest in it. Now, I certainly could have designed this video as a sort of ski jump, right? Straight downhill, maximum speed. But I wanted to make the argument that for a story, quantity of motion isn't only a matter of velocity. Rather, quantity of motion can be increased using any number of narrative techniques, including the introduction of conflict,
You're Daisy if you do.
the exploration of subplots,
I'm gonna be a little bit short on today's quota.
the use of cliffhangers,
You can't be dead.
and the intentional manipulation of tone and pacing, which can dramatically increase tension.
Let's find our man, bring him safely back to camp.
The important part about all this, though, is that all stories rely on narrative momentum. It's not just action-packed thrillers. In fact, I'd argue that seemingly glacially paced stories, or stories where the conflict and action are primarily internal, are working every bit as hard and probably even harder than those in which the conflict and action are externally dramatized.
I'm special.
The point is that by intentionally cultivating and maintaining narrative momentum, the writer learns how to guide a reader's attention from the beginning of a story all the way to its conclusion, be that the resolution of a love triangle, or be that the narrow survival of an alien invasion. So if, and it's not a small if, but if you are still watching at this point in the video, I'm assuming two things. One is that the video has managed to hold your attention thus far, and two, that for this to have been worth your while, the ending needs to be both satisfying and at the same time somehow surprising. And of course, this circles us back to the idea that a story is not for the writer, but for the reader. That just as a jungle gym is merely the infrastructure that facilitates the experience of a child at play, a book or a screenplay is merely the infrastructure that facilitates the experience of a reader. It's a small but potentially consequential shift in thinking. So I leave you with this. If you can tip the attention of your reader into motion, and if you can continue to anticipate and guide that attention, you can learn to build up momentum, increase the quantity of motion, and ultimately deliver an experience that, though the reader thought they saw it coming, is, with a little luck, both inevitable yet somehow surprising. As always, thank you for watching. Please take anything that's helpful and disregard the rest.